Keisha James, one of your hosts.
Hey, and I'm Marcus Hodges. Welcome back to The Fifth, and I am so excited to have the man, and I always call him the man, Michael Nail, who is the commissioner of the Georgia Department of Community Supervision, who's been an innovator, who's been a lifelong practitioner, who believes in transformation and is doing an awesome job in the Georgia system, will join this broadcast with us. So I'm excited to have you, Michael Nail. Great for you to be here. And before we get started, that's right.
For you, you're excited for you, and you're following behind Veronica Cunningham.
So yeah,
you're in the heat on this one.
Woo, pressure is on, but it is absolute pleasure to be here. I'm gonna hang around you guys more with all that hype going on, but it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'll tell you what, while it may be some hype, we followed you. I followed you for a long time. I mean, and I love the work that you've done in Georgia, the earnest way you do it. I mean, you accept the things that we can fix. You own the things that we probably would be bad at, trying to improve, and you're always trying to improve the system. And I just want to give you a kudos for your leadership, not only for Georgia, but for the nation, because there are some areas that you're leading the nation in. So before we get started, we take a few minutes to our listeners and just give a little bit about your background. Tell them who you are, what you do, and things like that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, thank you again, Marcus. And in all seriousness, I can't take the credit. I'm just smart enough to hire smarter people and work around smarter people at the end of the day. But yeah, I actually started as a felony probation officer in the state of Georgia back in 1989. I've held several positions during that time frame, from deputy director of probation for the state system, over probation training. And then we created a corrections division, a Department of Corrections. And I was a deputy division director, then division director, where I oversaw the operation of prisons, probation, and special operations for Department of Corrections at that time. Then I had the pleasure to go over and serve as the executive director of the State Board of Pardons and Paroles for 5 years. And then legislation created our Georgia Department of Community Supervision that basically merged two agencies for their community supervision: probation from corrections, parole supervision from parole. Created a separate entity. That was in July of 2015. And I was actually very honored to be asked to serve as the first commissioner and come over and start the agency up. So while I'd like to say we're not new anymore, we're still the newest, but we've still got a lot of work to do. But I will say this: combining individuals from two respective agencies, but also folks that really didn't have much experience at all in criminal justice, has been invaluable. And I think that's a key to what has really made us a strong agency.
Thanks, Michael. I mean, like I said, this podcast is really about transformation of the criminal justice systems by practitioners. And you and I have always talked about it, because I know I probably didn't tell the audience that you're also president of the National Association of Probation Executives. And it's very important that if we want to transform this system, that we need to have practitioners at the table. So what I want to ask your first question is this. Transformation didn't just happen in Georgia. I mean, everybody looks at criminal justice transformation and they signal George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery. But I know transformation was going on in Georgia under Governor Deal, and you were a part of that whole process. Tell us about how important transformation is to you as a leader of your agency, and what steps you've taken to do that.
Well, I think it, number one, is absolutely important. And I think that our business should always be continual transformation. We can be proactive, but there are times we'll find ourselves being reactive with situations. But for me, it was my first time. Actually, Georgia went down the road of a truth in sentencing. That never materialized. And that was probably my first insight into really being part of big change, if you will. And you're right, Governor Deal, with criminal justice reform, came about. The prison system was too big. Looked at ways to divert it. We realized diversion through accountability courts. And by the way, I didn't sit on the commission, but I did play a support role in the commission. or the council, if you will, but the diversion process, but also the reentry process. So it was almost full circle. And that's where actually our agency came out of. And one thing it did, if I can sidestep here, is it gave corrections ability to focus on operating safe and secure facilities and focus on reentry. It gave the parole board more time to focus solely on release decision making. And so it allowed 3 agencies to not try to be everything to everybody, but to work together. And I think continuously to transform it. One of the things we did legislatively, we passed Senate Bill 174, and that actually gave a behavior incentive date to individuals. It gave an opportunity for folks to come off of supervision, not just in an administrative status, but to be terminated. What we found, we were really penny wise and pound foolish. We were spending a lot of money on supervising folks simply because they owed money.
That's right.
And the irony of it is, Marcus and Alicia, they never had the ability to pay it to start with. Mm-hmm. And it made no sense. So Senate Bill 174 was enacted. So that has been beneficial. We've got a bill right now, not we, but the legislature of Senate Bill 105 that kind of expedites that process. We found that it was not being fully utilized or taken advantage of as much as it should have. And I think that's an important point with criminal justice reform and transformation. Don't forget to go back and make sure that what you did is doing what it was intended to do. Right. Because I think we've all seen where we move on to the second thing and the third thing and the fourth thing, and I like to call it organizational schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. And you forget to go back and see, oh gosh, are we really accomplishing what we set out to do? And that's what we're really under right now. So and taking on new things that we're doing.
Okay. You bring up a perfect you set the perfect framework for the reform and the transformation conversation. And I think that, Marcus, you hit on it all the time, like, having sat in some of the most influential seats in law enforcement, and not really like law enforcement, community corrections, criminal justice system, right?
Sure.
And not really in the limelight. Like probation and parole typically isn't in the limelight. Oftentimes it's not highlighted in the movies, right? So when we think about transformation, Michael, what is your input or your take on what is the role of community corrections or community supervision in criminal justice transformation specifically?
I think, Alicia, it is a monumental role. And here's why I say that. Mass incarceration is something that was taken on, and they looked at diversion and they looked at early release. Well, guess where those individuals came?
That's right.
And you never paid close attention to community supervision. It's absolutely critical. When you look at the facet of the criminal justice system, whether it be prison, whether it be parole, whether it be probation, the largest number of individuals are under community supervision.
Yes.
Absolutely. And then let's not forget that word community, because we know we can't do it by ourselves, and we have to engage with partners in the community. It's ironic, and I won't use only Georgia because I think this is the case everywhere, but let's say you have law enforcement and they make a felony arrest. They're done with them for the most part.
Yes.
They're done with them. Guess what? We've got to deal with them and their families and their issues for a good 5 years on average. So there's that stacking effect. But the bottom line is we're getting individuals, our average age of somebody under community supervision is 35 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So 35 years old, here's the question. Now, they've had opportunities with churches, with schools, all different accesses to community assistance, education. So suddenly, after 35 years, they come on to felony probation, and suddenly people are going, here you go, fix them. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's a very real question. So where's everybody been the past 35 years? And I think that is a critical point and a monumental role that community supervision plays, is engaging the community to help us help these individuals that need to get back to being law-abiding, productive citizens. At the end of the day, I don't care what facet of the criminal justice system you're in, that's what it's about. If they've been to prison, we don't want them going back. If they've never been to prison, we don't want them to go to start with. And ideally, we don't want their kids to ever become part of the criminal justice system.
Right.
Hey, I agree with that 100%. I mean, what I hear from you is the whole notion of true collaboration.
Absolutely.
And at times, I think in past the community corrections piece, we don't truly, at times, we truly collaborate. We're afraid to collaborate because if people, when you look under the rock, you see what you see, and we know we're not a perfect system. We know we're not. But I think the strength in supervision and the whole community is we've got to collaborate. So what you described for me, and if you had a magic wand and they say, Commissioner Nail, what does the perfect criminal justice system look like? What would you say?
I would start it with a term of one size fits one.
Okay.
It's not a one size fits all. You first have to look at the needs and risk of that individual, and you tailor a sentence to that individual. You don't impose conditions that have nothing to do with those needs. You don't keep them on any longer than they need to be on to have those needs addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Once they address those needs and they're successful, they're done.
Right.
They're done. And they're off. And they're through. And they get to go about doing what they ought to be doing in the first place. And that's working, supporting their family, being law-abiding, productive citizens. But it's got to start with a one size fits one. You can't line 30 people up and take pleas and go down the road going 5 years probation, 5 years probation, 5 years probation. Because one of them, listen, they got the crap scared out of them when they got arrested.
That's right.
You're never going to see them again. You have another one that's really battling mental illness and substance abuse that has never had the opportunity to be addressed. But the way we're going to address it is to put about 14 conditions on them and say, okay, good luck. Here's what you got to do. And that's just not the way to do it. It's got to be prescriptive. It's got to have the right dosage. I've heard the best analogy it's just like going to the doctor. You know, the doctor's not going to load you up on so many prescriptions and then send you out the door. No, the doctor's going to say, I need you to come back and see me.
That's right.
At this time, so we can chart out a plan. But you can't do that when you're putting everybody and their brother under community supervision. It's just not going to happen. You'll never have the resources.
Wow. It can't be a catch-all, right? Like it can't be a catch-all. So we'll give Michael a second to come back on. Looks like he might have a lag in his connection.
Cap on a sentence and say, when you do meet these, you're done.
Right.
You're done.
Exactly. Let me ask you a question. We both, have supervised larger state agencies, me in Tennessee, you in Georgia, most of Georgia copycatted off Tennessee, but who's counting?
Oh, no competition there.
Shots fired, right? But no, seriously, larger agencies and Marcus, you have the duality of having, the federal funds come in and you have, kind of a completely different system than what we'd experienced in the state. Michael, as we think through and as we talk about like the needs of probation and parole at the state level, I mean, there's a finite area for resources and funding, right? And so when we talk about like one size fits one, theoretically, that is optimally, I think, that hits the nail on the head, like you said, if in a perfect world, we would have that. But how have you navigated? What were some of the things that you did to navigate and pull your team through criminal justice reform in a very conservative environment when it wasn't very popular, with scarce resources, a whole lot of people in supervision, and not a whole lot of probation and parole officers. Can you talk us through that?
I can. I think one thing, if you wait on the resources, you're going to be waiting a long time. Mm-hmm. And I've seen leaders that want to wait on the resources. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You know, Peter Drucker said that if you're going to take something on, you got to slough something off.
That's right.
And that's exactly what this is. So what we do and what we have done, you simply got to prioritize. You've got to come to terms that, you know what, at the end of the day, there's some people that do not need your services. And in fact, we all know research says that we can actually over-supervise individuals and get an adverse effect. So I think that's the first thing. The other thing is you got to prioritize who is going to get your services. And you look at those high risk, high need. You look at the sex offender population. You look at the mental health population. You look at those that are just coming out, being released. Those are who you need to devote the majority of your resources to. And then the others, they'll take care of themselves. I think I remember the term that it really resonated with me. They're self-correctors. There's a lot of them that are self-correctors. What happens is we get in their way.
That's right.
But they truly are self-correctors. And I think, Alicia, back to your original question, you've got to prioritize, and you cannot be a system that is trying to be everything to everybody. You just won't be able to do it. And oh, by the way, stop holding officers to unreal standards and unreal expectations.
Wow.
That's a whole word right there.
Wow.
Because they don't just sit around and supervise cases. So walk with me on this journey just for a second. Let's take 28 days. Okay. You're limited to 160 hours or 171 hours within that 28-day period, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you'll have a holiday in there. Mm-hmm. Oh, let's not forget about the mandatory training that they have to go to. Let's not forget that they've got to go sit in court for 6 hours, and they're going to be last to be heard because they're still going to be paid for that time, while the attorney is going to be heard first because they're losing money when they sit there. And that's a mentality that happens. So you look at that and you factor all of those things into it. It's not just one thing. But at the end of the day, Superman couldn't supervise the number of cases that these officers have. And I think we do a disservice when we hold them to an unfair expectation, because here's what happens. If they do supervise all the cases they have, and I can tell you from Georgia, and Marcus, I'm not afraid to say where we've made mistakes. Mm-hmm. I think that's what makes you better. But when you've got an officer on average spending 3 to 6 minutes with an individual, I can tell you it's not quality.
That's right.
It is not quality. But when you have an officer that is spending 20 or 25 minutes with an individual, talking about their plan, where they are with it, what the next steps are, that's quality. And that's what we've got to do through prioritization, is ensure that we're delivering the quality of it. And it really doesn't matter. We've got finite resources at the national level, at a state level, at a local level. But that strategy of prioritization works regardless of the size of the system.
I appreciate your comments on that. I think that's why this podcast exists. Yeah. I mean, that's this podcast is, I said it earlier and I'll say it again, is practitioners. If we're going to transform it, it's practitioners having real dialogue. And I really appreciate that response, because at the end of the day, It's the officers. It's boots on ground who's going to get it done. And they know what they need to do. Our kids, like I always tell people, I need to get out the way. I need to coach, guide, and support and get out the way. You know, I mean, so I really appreciate that. So in saying all of that, what would you say in this whole notion of transformation, what has been your biggest challenge and obstacle?
You just alluded to it. Individuals and organizations that are influencing the way we do business, maybe on an anecdotal incident or not completely factual data or stats that shape the true picture. I think that is a challenge. You know what my doctor really hates? My doctor hates when I go in and I start the conversation saying, I read this on Google. He can't stand it. No. He's like, well, I'll tell you what, next time you need a doctor, you just stick with Dr. Google.
Uh-huh.
Well, you know what? That's because Michael's not a doctor. Mm-hmm. And I'm not an attorney. I don't need to be playing attorney. And I think one of the challenges we have to deal with, everybody's got an opinion about the criminal justice system. There's no doubt about it. But is your opinion grounded in research?
Yes.
How much have you engaged the individuals out there doing the job? Because, Marcus, you and I have talked about it. Number one, those doing the job, they know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They know what's broke. But guess what? They also know how to fix it.
That's right.
And that is the biggest challenge, is spending our time and energy after the train has left the station with somebody that says, we've got this problem and here's how we need to fix it. And I used to work for a retired major general who was a commissioner. And I learned very quickly, you've always got to look at the third and fourth order effects of something. And you're not going to know what those are if you've not been in the business. And I think that speaks to why it's so cyclical. While we look at it running in like 10-year cycle, we make a little bit of progress, but not a whole lot. But I really do think that is one of the biggest frustrations and challenges. I know as a correctional administrator is folks wanting to know what you need to be successful at your job without even asking you, and certainly without paying attention to the data. And by the way, I'm not talking just Georgia. I've heard this.
It's everywhere.
Across the nation. If folks would just engage those doing the job, sit down, talk to them, take the time to understand what the challenges are, we would all be better off. We would all be better off. Oh, and by the way, let me say this. Sometimes those individuals that we're referring to that understand the way we do it are those that were actually under our supervision.
Yeah,
exactly right.
And that has been an emerging, trend. Before, I remember when I was with federal probation, we would never consider having conversation roundtables with individuals who are just as involved to think about how to modify policy for operations that impacted them, right?
Yep.
I mean, it ain't like you said, when you go and you grow and you learn, learn that things to do to help, advance the agenda in a more holistic way, in a more, shared experience way. Because as you mentioned, Michael, like oftentimes we will see products or services directed towards clients, but really not focused on how it alleviates or how it makes a probation officer more effective in his or her day-to-day operation, right? And so we want to make the clients whole, but we also want to support and uplift those individuals who are raising their hands saying, I'll do this job oftentimes for $35,000 in the metropolitan area, and they have children themselves. So I think the dynamics, not making excuses, but one thing I love about this podcast is we want to bring awareness to all the different points of concern, of all these different considerations that people have to take into account, our legislative bodies, our judges, our, people in the community, that we have to take into account for that. So I want to ask you a question about a really hot topic, right?
Okay.
I don't know if pretrial falls up under your chain of command. Do you guys have pretrial services as well?
It does not. No.
So good. So I can dig in and get a good subject matter kind of distant opinion on it. There's been a lot of conversation around pretrial reform, bail reform. What are your takes on the emerging best practices around pretrial operations? And how do you think that's going to positively or negatively impact the probation and parole system?
You know, I probably don't pay close enough attention to it, all fairness and honesty, because it's not really my bailiwick, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say I get very concerned when folks think the right answer is like do away with cash bail. And that may be the answer. It may not be the answer. What concerns me is let's make sure whatever we do our due diligence to ensure it's going to have the intended outcome.
Yes.
And I think that's an example where you have a lot of folks that probably need to be at the table that aren't at the table. It's a very divisive topic. And I don't think it's one that needs to be rushed.
Right.
That's not to suggest it's not important, but I think we've got to really pay attention to, okay, what the problem is, how did it get to where it is, and then how do we go about fixing it? What is the best way to fix it? So I think there's so many sides to the story, all probably very valid. I certainly can't weigh in for it or against it because I myself do not know enough to make that decision. And I think it'd be irresponsible as a leader to wade into that and say, I'm for it, against it, and I really don't have all the information on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something interesting in and of itself that you serve in a commissioner position and hadn't really been invited to the table to have the conversations about what is the impact, like you said, due diligence and looking at it from all different perspectives. And maybe they've engaged other, probation and parole officials, but I would think as a leading voice in Georgia, as the leader of your division, and hopefully that will happen, right? Hey, hopefully there is conversation, because I like you, feel that vetting and seeing where there's opportunity. I definitely think that we have socioeconomic constraints on individuals who are already oppressed financially, and we have to evaluate that. But I feel like we need a scalpel and not a machete, right? Like we have to figure this thing out like a surgeon and not just like Jason and Friday the 13th. And when you talk about the financial aspect of it, absolutely. And if I will tell you, if someone is being held in jail or incarcerated simply for the fact they do not have the financial resources, and that's the only thing keeping them, no, there's got to be a better.
And see, my thing is this: I think there's middle ground there. I think what has happened in this issue is it becomes very political, and people are dug in both sides of their way of business. And both sides, I'll go out to say it right now, are dysfunctional. I mean, so I think through dialogue with practitioners, I think you find a common ground. We can create a more humane system in that area, but we got to get politics out of it, and we got to get sure the practitioners on both sides are at the table, because I truly believe on both sides they really want to do what is right for people. I'm an eternal optimist. So and we're in the people business. So we're not here to do harm. We're here to uplift people. So if that's the goal, both sides need to come together and come with a plan of how we can do that. Because if not, it's going to be dictated upon them by somebody else. And we know how that goes.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Marcus. I think there's the solution is in the middle somewhere.
Yes.
And I think what happens, you have perhaps one group, whichever side you're on, is almost to the extreme. So the other group wants to dig in.
Yes.
Instead of both sides just gravitating towards the middle for a better understanding and a better system. And again, I think that's where, when we say politics, I don't mean in a legislative viewpoint, but the politics of just people's belief on the criminal justice system in and of itself.
Yeah, there you go. I love it.
Michael, I'm gonna tell you what, and I know Ms. James may have a question for you, but I think this has been outstanding. And don't be surprised there'll be a part 2 where we bring you back to have these robust conversations. But what advice would you give to a practitioner that's in a leadership role that's trying to lead transformation in their system? You know how difficult it is, and you know it's easy just to stay status quo, but we weren't hired to be status quo. We were hired to affect change. So what advice would you give to them?
You won't be able to do it by yourself. And I was somewhat joking, but very serious at the start of the podcast. Is I'm just fortunate enough to have smarter people around me. If I've heard the saying, the proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. Mm-hmm. If you want to go far, go together.
That's right.
And I think this is one of those cases. You really have to have folks that are not in your corner, but in the corner of what's trying to be done. And don't necessarily put your allegiance or loyalty to a person, but put it to a purpose. Wow. And I think that's what I would say, and stick to it. Folks know whether you're sincere or not. You can't talk this way in front of one group and go down the road and talk another way in front of another group. That's not going to fly. Mm-hmm. That's not going to fly. So you got to stand strong in your convictions, but they have to be purpose driven. And you've just got to be loyal to the purpose. And at the end of the day, you got to self-reflect. And when you find out that you may not be as loyal to the purpose, it's probably time to move on down the road and step out of the way, because there's plenty of other folks that are.
Outstanding.
Wholeheartedly agree. I want to kind of wrap up on a lighthearted question. I feel like I'm the lighthearted one of the hosts.
That's not true.
My husband will probably disagree. So you know what? In this day and age, we're in the midst of a pandemic. You guys, Georgia started to pivot to a more remote model, vehicle-based, field-based model even before the pandemic. But you're still leading people through crisis. You have always maintained a lighthearted personality. You are the life of the party, right? You just have a fantastic, phenomenal perception of comedy. Let's say that the comedic content, if you will, bringing levity constantly. How do you maintain that, especially in the face of change and challenge, and everybody has an opinion everywhere you go?
Yeah.
How do you stay so upbeat?
I guess it's just the personality part of it. Though EQ versus IQ, I don't have a lot of IQ, so I got to make it up with a whole bunch of EQ. But I think that doesn't mean you don't have bad days. That don't mean you don't have days where you're really pissed off, or where you're down, or you leave. You've all had those days. You walk out and you go, damn, I've never worked so hard and accomplished so little in all my life. Mm-hmm. But I think it really is, Alicia. So how do you bounce back from those days? And is that going to drive you? Is that going to be your persona? But I've never seen an individual that didn't want to laugh. And as long as we're laughing at myself, we're not laughing at other people. And I think that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, we just do the best we can. And it's like the old serenity prayer, and that can apply to our business as well, because some things you can't change. You just roll with it.
Yeah.
So that, I guess that's how I stay with the lightheartedness. I don't know. But thank you. I appreciate it. I've always had a great deal of respect for both of you all and the systems that you'd run. But I think, quite candidly, I've had more respect for the two of you personally. And I think that's what it is when you know those individuals personally, then you're ready to get behind them. When they're real and authentic, you're ready to get behind them. And I think that's part of the key.
Thank you. Outstanding.
Well, Marcus, you got any? I'll wrap up, but you got any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I'm gonna tell you what. Outstanding. I knew we was gonna go longer than 30 minutes because I know him. I tell you what, we're going to lead this charge. We're going to get practitioners at the table, and we're going to work to transform this system and make it that we make it what we want. And I know we can do that. I mean, and it starts with the podcast. It starts with these conversations, but it really talks about we got to empower practitioners to do, because I think a lot of times we came up where we didn't do much. We just sat back, and allow everybody to dictate upon us. Times have changed. We got to drive this bus now. They can support Coach and Gab, but we need to drive the bus and lead the change from a practitioner standpoint. So we're calling for practitioners to stand up, lead this change, and let's build this system that we know we can build.
Well, I appreciate you guys taking the step to do that. This is big. It really is. It's very good.
We just want to continue the conversation. And I'll say my last little comments before Michael, we're going to close on you. But, I think that this time it's never been more important for leaders, regardless of where you sit and what your role is. And now I even see that in the consultancy and working with agencies across the nation, internationally, on criminal justice reform. Like, now is the time that we have to use this momentum to push forward, to innovate, to elevate, to use these, these God-given talents, and not just sit on it and, with the conversation. I think our conversation will lead others, inspire others to do more, reach more, dig deeper, right? And I think that's our charge as leaders, and regardless of wherever our feet land. But with that, there's a whole lot of action. Like you mentioned, Michael, there's a whole lot of heavy days. Like, this stuff it's not easy work. And for me, I feel like it motivates me to continue to keep going and doing the work. But we certainly appreciate leaders like you who have seen it and who have, gone through the good, the bad, the ugly, and continue to push. You have one of the largest systems, if not the largest systems, in the United States, right? Georgia is a huge system. And you were talking about criminal justice reform and justice reinvestment. I remember, I think we were in NIC, it was the meeting in Michigan, and we were talking about it, and we were getting ready to pass our legislation in Tennessee, and you guys had already passed it. And, you guys were having these conversations and modifying policies and practices and procedure, and that stuff doesn't make USA Today. But like you said, leaders in the industry recognize and appreciate your work. So kudos to you for continuing to push in unpopular seasons, as a strong white male in the South, right? Breaking down those norms about ideas and labels that people can place on us because of their insecurities. And you're like, yeah, but that's not me, and that's not how I'm going to roll, and I'm going to keep two-stepping. So we appreciate you and all of your dopeness. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to let you have the last words.
No, I first of all, thank you. That very, very kind, and I wholeheartedly agree. I think the biggest thing as a leader, I try to close my day out asking, did I leave it better as a result of me being part of it? Mm-hmm. Did I build it up or did I tear it down? And we've got a system that needs to continue to be built up. And do I want to be a contributor, or do I want to just accept the way it is? And I choose, just like you all, to be a contributor and to be part of it and to help shape it. And there are many, many other fantastic correctional leaders across the nation that they too have that desire. And I really do think it's time to answer that call and let's do what we know is the right thing to do.
Thank you again, Commissioner Nail, for joining us. Thanks to our viewers for listening and watching. Make sure that you subscribe, share this podcast, and catch us on our next episode. Thank you.